Hi everyone, I'm Hunter and welcome back to the Hunter Valley PaleoZoo. Today we'll be returning to the Lost Africa Precinct to add the Majungasaurus, as well as 4 highly detailed terrariums with some really cool African Mesozoic herbs. For this enclosure, I took inspiration from multiple real-world cheetah exhibits around the world, but in particular the Colombus Zoo and Aquarium was my main source, to create a dynamic enclosure that utilises multiple different viewing galleries and perspectives to feel alive, and as though it was ripped right out of a real zoo. So kicking off the speed build, as always, I've already gone in and mapped out roughly where I want the enclosure to be with terrain paints, and I've actually for this enclosure had to sink it down, and this is kind of like map what you'll see in a second with the inspiration image I've used from the Colombus Zoo and Aquarium, that kind of like wooden like viewing gallery, elevated walkway kind of situation they have going over there. And then I've gone ahead and used a scale person figure just off the workshop, and that's all that's doing is allow me to work out exactly where I want it to sit, so you know, looking down it feels about right, doesn't look too far deep. All of that because I do want to have a nice gorge walkway kind of like going down into the earth where you can like view them at eye level, and so you don't want that path to have to be too steep or too long, and so just kind of working out those levels there. And here I've decided that after putting in the Majungasaurus in, it felt a little bit too small, so I'm remapping it out, kind of seeing how they look in there and doing all of that. We ended up changing the shape. Even again over here you can see over here I'm just making it a little bit bigger to map that terrain paints. I ended up going just around beside, and you'll see all kinds of things that we end up doing there. And so I'm just kind of making sure I have the size exactly how I want it, that rough shape, and you can see I'm using those mud pillars, again, that we used in the Spinosaurus episode last time, and so yeah, we're just kind of using those as kind of like the mapping for most of it, but we'll also have those viewing galleries and all that kind of stuff. And so now I'm just kind of wrapping out a bit of a rough plaster floor, kind of working out a bit of the colours for what I want for this area, and at first I go to match that with that path, I end up changing that a bit later, but for now that's what we've got going on over here, and now I want to use one of the fences we used in the Spinosaurus enclosure, on that safari fencing kind of situation over there, using the little wood sticks. And I'm kind of like getting that ready, while also making sure I've got the train as close to that edge as possible without peeking out, so that you can explore as much of this enclosure in first person without a vehicle as possible. So I kind of get that kind of sort of situation where I'm happy with, and then put in a bit more of those flooring, testing how it's looking in first person, and then just going ahead, and you can see over here now, disclaimer, I lost the first hour of recording. I completely forgot about that just until then, that big jump there. But I did go ahead and make this fence that you can see over there using a bunch of different like little mini shrunken stick pieces, which you can see in that fence there. And then as well as some of the, in the Rebirth pack, one of the Temple Stone sets. I think it's Temple Stones 2 or something like that, something along the lines of that. And so that's what I used to kind of create that fence there. And I'll end up using that a lot more throughout the speed build. Over here what I'm starting to work on now is the main walkway that kind of goes around to the other side of the habitat. And so I'm using some of the pontoon pieces from I believe the Rebirth pack. They might be from the Wetlands, so I'm 90% sure they're Rebirth pack. I use a lot of the Rebirth pack pieces in this set. Really good pieces. Some of the dinosaurs, the mutants and stuff, they're not going to be for everyone, but the pieces are definitely a must-have if you're a creative builder. And you'll see a lot more of those get used throughout this speed build later on. And so now I'm kind of creating this kind of like slats to go across it, and then we'll end up seeing we take another one of these beams and just add a little bit of like an olive green kind of tint in there that I was picking up based on that inspiration image. So I put that in there, and then looking for a wood panel to kind of create the bulk of the wall that's going down along there. And we end up picking this one out, from the Japanese theme, I guess you would call it the East Asia theme. And then using some of these pillars to kind of create like a gated version of the fence, I guess you'd call it the wall, elevated viewing walkway, whatever you want to call it. And then I go ahead and flip them on its other side to give it a bit more width to allow more people to be able to walk through, and we make a version that doesn't have that X, just for a bit of variation. And so now I'm working on the guest fence on this walkway, and I kind of like using these wood pillars here, we kind of shrinking down the ones that go in them so that it kind of looks, like these have been like nailed in, slatted, whatever you want to call it. And so I made those 2 of those, and we use the the mesh gantry from the Rebirth pack, another incredible piece. And we use those to create the fence, and they end up lining up perfectly, so that was really fun. And then here we start to map out where I want this to be. So I end up using the X ones when at the start and end of a change in angle, so we have a curve at part of it, and I kind of use it to block that off, as well as at the start and end of each of them. So you can see over there, we started curving it, so I've put that X in there, and then we kind of start toying around, it looks really good. and just kind of like mapping this out. I don't want to take up too much space of the enclosure, obviously, because it is sunken and it's kind of bordering onto that main path there where you would go to enter the tropical house. So I don't want to encroach on that area of the zoo too much. So I'd rather push it back the way of where the walkway is. So I'm trying to keep as much space as possible there. And then once I'm happy with that curve, you can see I've placed in that another X1 just to kind of like add a little bit of a visual marker of where the path straightens out and where it curves. So I've also realized here that I forgot to put the X's on the other side, so I just kind of like bring the terrain up, and now it's not really an elevated walkway, but you know, it still looks really cool. And so then I go ahead and just tranquilize the Majungas. They got out while I was moving it, and the objects lost their collision. So we go ahead and do that. And I just check that you can still kind of walk across it, which is really good. And here, as I was mentioning before, that like lowered gorge walkway, I'm kind of starting to map out where I want that using the ramp tools. So now I'm starting to work on a shade structure. We'll end up duplicating this and putting in 2 of them in there. And so again, I'm using kind of talking about there, using different scales of the poles to kind of make sure they looks like they'd fit in there. If they're the exact same width, it kind of looks a little bit wrong. It's really not that big of a deal. I just prefer to have them sunken, and then you can see I layered them in different ways so that they're not kind of phasing through each other, unless it's a beam that's being put into another beam. And so now I'm working on the roof here. I want to go for that thatch roof. Again, very much based off of that viewing that shade structure on the Colombus Zoo and Aquarium one. This was a bit of a fun little challenge. Obviously this is trying to put grid pieces onto a non-grid because there's no off-the-grid thatch pieces, which would be nice, but it's a bit of a fun challenge, and we get there in the end. Just kind of making out those lengths, working out where I want that to start so that it kind of overlaps, while also not phasing through. So then you see adding a bit more of a overhang on the sides there, lining it up perfectly in the middle there. Well, as close to perfect as I can get it. And then you're starting to add in some support beams on the diagonal over here, as well as some vertical support beams, and just having a bit of fun kind of filling out this space that's feeling a little bit empty. And so we duplicate that onto the other side, and then go ahead and add these up there. And once I'm kind of happy with how that looks, just quickly adding a few little vertical support, diagonal supports on that middle post, I can then go ahead and duplicate it across each side, each of those 3 support pillars along there. So I add another one in, and just kind of like moving it across, kind of centering it, and then adding on these nice little overhangs to kind of get rid of that side bit there. And that viewing structure is done. We end up duplicating it. I don't know if I put that in the recording there. Oh, you can see the second one there. And so now what I'm doing is creating this kind of like center, kind of like it's going to be a bit of an island, but you see here, and I'm starting to add in a bit of a ramp. I kind of think some kind of like, not really Pride Rocky, but like it kind of has that same effect. And create a bit of an elevated area. And so I line that up with some of the those mud walls. And now I'm going ahead and adding in the main trees of the inside of the enclosure, working on the sight lines, so it's kind of like placing them from the positions where guests would be. And then also working on the terrain paint, so a lot of grass. I really want to go for a long grass aesthetic here, but also adding in using the dirts and paste trails, like these are the paths that the Majungasaurus take the most, and therefore the least amount of grass has been able to grow there, and it's kind of downtrodden. So you can see over here, I'm just working on the back side of it, the enclosure over here. You can see it's like really close, so I'm like, oh, okay, I end up changing out that path. But now we're going on to work onto the canyon, the gorge viewing over there. So adding in some glass and then filling up these gaps in the mud walls, using some of these smooth rocks here. I forget the name of the actual rock, but that's okay. And then adding in a rock border to the window as well, leaving it on the bottom. And then over on the top here, using some of more of those rocks, creating like an overhang, cavey sort of appearance there. And we'll do that on that other window we have over here as well, kind of using different angles and stuff to make it not just be a square window, add a bit of visual variety. And then over here we start to work on the first two of our 4 terrariums. These are for a few little really small ones over here. These don't have a specific species I had in mind, the other 2 do. But these are just kind of like maybe very small lizards, or some Mesozoic spiders, or other like insects they found in the amber, and they could get the DNA out of there instead of from a mosquito. So that's the kind of like lore behind these. And so this one here we're doing over here is more of a tropical one. You'll see I'm using the micro scaling glitch there, where you scale down a non-grid object and then you switch into we scale down a gridded object and then switch into a non-gridded object. Non-scalable, yeah, usually, whatever. You get what I'm trying to say. And then you kind of switch into one that can be scaled, and it goes really small, or you can make it really big. And we use that technique a lot in this build. You see here I'm adding in some of the climber plants over there, and then adding in a bit of a light so you can see. And I think it turns out really nice. We use some tree ferns, kind of like coming out the side. And then here we go into more of a deserty one, so I'm using some of the sand as our terrain there, as our substrate. And then again, using those small fallen trees, kind of like some sticks. And then, obviously, very different foliage for this one. We got some of the small prickly pears, kind of like as a kind of really sunken in, so it kind of looks like a bit of a ground succulent coverage, like a pig face or something like that. And then using some really small micro rocks to kind of create these little rock ledges and stuff for whatever's going in here. Scorpion, or I don't know, it could be anything that's going in here. Another spider, a small desert lizard, who knows? Just really up to imagination, whatever you think wants to go in here is perfectly valid. So we go ahead and we do that, and it's looking really cool. And so once I'm happy with those, I end up putting the glass back in there. Just as a little bit hard to work with the glass there, so I decided to remove it, and then we'll add it back in later, as you can see there. And then I'm fixing up the barriers over the wall so you can't see the metal barriers of the glass. And then I'm using those rocks to cover that back up. And this was rough rock 2, I believe it is, or 5, one of the 2. And so then I take some of those slanted rocks on the mud walls, just kind of smooth it in, make it feel a bit more like it's part of those other rocks we had going on there. Kind of like merging it all together, and then I move it a bit closer, kind of a bit more of a tighter walkway there, while still being manageable for guest flow. And so we go ahead, fill in all the the little gaps there of the glass where it shouldn't be, and I think it turns out really nice. So now the next part of this viewing gallery, this walkway, is to create the floor. So you can see over here, I've gone for a bit of a ramp up to get back up to the top, and obviously since there's no room for an elevator, this can't be stairs for accessibility, so this is the main path, but also don't want it to be too steep. So just to kind of like make sure I've got that little path there, and then I put a flat bit in between, and that just allows me to line it up a little bit nicer, rather than trying to line up slanted pieces. So makes my life a little bit easier, and it looks really good with that, while keeping the angles correct. So I changed that out to that red of that path there, and I think that turns out really nice. It kind of like blends in with the wall of the rock in a really nice way, while also keeping that distinction separate. So I go ahead and I'm kind of removing out the terrain as I go, just to get that up to ground level. And you can see over here, I'm just moving them up, keeping it on that nice curve, rotating it around on that x-axis, I believe. Yeah, x-axis. Yeah. And then once it's basically right at the top, I just continue up that slope instead of doing another one. And so then I go ahead, because it needs an exit, copy all of those pieces, remove the terrain, and then kind of get that back up to the surface on the other side. And the fun thing about this enclosure is that you see that's the end of the precinct with that path outwards, but you don't go there immediately after going on those other viewing galleries. You'll go through 2 other enclosures, and then you come back to the Majunga as you go through this gorge, and I think that's really fun. Kind of plays with how the viewing experience of the precinct in a really fun way, I find. And I also see I'm leaving gaps for 2 more larger terrariums, which will be for marinara, which is a snake. I might be pronouncing that wrong. I'll quickly check that. I believe it is marinara. Yeah, no, menarana, not marana. That's a source. I was going to say, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, menarana, which is a 2.4 meter long Mesozoic snake from Africa. Potentially Madagascar, I can't remember, but I know the other one we have is definitely Madagascar, and that is beelzelbufo, the giant frog. Classic Mesozoic herp, and I thought, we've got to put it in there. It fits the bill too well. And so this enclosure right there, that one there is for the marinara, and the other one will be for the beelzelbufo. I'm just adding in these little arbor. These arbors over here, and I'm kind of playing around with the color. And we end up going with I think orange at this point, but I think I later changed it out for red off camera. But they're white at the moment, and so I'm just playing around with the rocks over there. That's the beelzelbufo enclosure we just passed by, and we'll work on that right now. So obviously these guys are frogs, and so they're semi-aquatic, and that was a really fun, they are ground frogs, but they still would have gone through, they would have needed a bit of water and lived by creeks and stuff. So that was a really fun challenge for me, and we end up doing something that I didn't personally invent this method. I've seen it done other places. I didn't come across those before making this, but I'm definitely not the first to do it. See, I'm over here, I'm trying out the pools at first. I end up not going with that though. I'm not going with those visitor fountain pieces you saw at the front, but I was under the impression that when you scaled them, the gap between the water and the gravel didn't increase. But see, I ended up doing some tests to realize that it does work. Here I'm still kind of playing around with the idea of using the pool pieces though, like we did in the... what was it? The Millennia enclosure back in the Deinonychus. I think, no, Paleoswania, that enclosure there. I see I'm also playing with using different, the groundwater, trying to work out how the hell I'm going to do the water in this enclosure. And we end up giving it another chance over here. I'm just kind of like working out the actual distance of the enclosure now. I've given up for a second. I'm like, oh, okay, the mud works fine. But I'm like, no, I reckon I can do something with this visitor center fountain. And you see over here, I'm kind of testing, okay, so if I scale it all the way up, that's how far that piece is going to sit out of it. And then when I line up, it's like, oh, hang on a minute, that's a lot more out. So then if I use our infinite scaling glitch, which isn't really infinite, we can get a really nice and actual reasonable size of water here for like a species like beelzelbufo, which isn't fully aquatic by any stretch of the imagination, but would need to get a bit of shallow water in their enclosure. So that turns out really well. And then you can see I'm able to kind of go ahead back in with our rocks and just create a little bit of, get rid of the substrate at the bottom of the water there. And then use some of the recolorable sand pieces to kind of map out where I want the water line, create a bit of an island there, add some fun little shapes to that water line, and then going ahead using the rocks to kind of create a fun, break up the barrier of the glass, make it not just be so square. Now here I'm using the Rebirth tropical rocks, which are in the free update, to kind of create a bit of like a muddy shore bank look. I really like these rocks, and I think I also used... No, I didn't use them in the other one, in the other tropical enclosure. But at first, and then over here I'm using another piece from the Rebirth pack, which I absolutely love, and we use them in the main enclosure as well, but these leaf litter decals, incredible piece, just as much as the paceable grass as well. The pieces in this expansion are just so good. So you see over here I'm playing around with more of a woodland kind of theming at first, but then I ended up going, nah, it needs to be a bit more tropical. And so we end up going full in on the tropical aspects. So here I'm going ahead, playing around, I'm just now going ahead using the rocks to fill in all of the gaps in the light, but not gaps in the wall. And then I'm going ahead and playing with the lights. I'm going to need a bit of a bigger light than I did for the other one, so we use these floodlights, ground floodlights I think they're called. I just flip them upside down to the ceiling lights. See over there going over the tropical, using in those tiny little date palms that we had before, as well as using some scaled down ivy as kind of like duckweed, pondweed, all that kind of cool stuff that grows on water. So going in there, we got some tree ferns, lots of different like sticks and stuff, some sticking out of the water, some on the land, as well as all kinds of different things over here, using in some bird nests, some of the lobster claws, and then I end up leaving it for there, but we do come back later. And right now, especially the placeable grass, I proceed to add the first layer of grass to the main enclosure. And you don't see all of it because I placed down 1,400 pieces of grass in this enclosure. Insane. I did a total piece count at the end. This enclosure is 30,000 pieces, so it's not on the workshop, which is just insane. But there's so many, all of these different mud walls and stuff being made up of like 100 pieces. It just adds up so quickly. So it doesn't feel like it when I'm making it, but when I look back, I'm like, oh my lord. Thankfully, this suit is not going to be huge. Otherwise, my computer would not handle it whatsoever. So you see they're adding in all the grass over here, working around those different pacing trails we made earlier, some of the rocks. I'll end up going in back later to add some like really big tall grass clumps everywhere. So over here, and you can see the effect of this because we're using the tall grass pieces here, not the short ones. So it actually ends up being a lot fuller, even when we sink it down, than it would be to use those terrain grass. So it's definitely worth it. It's just guaranteed to feel more intentional. You'll get it exactly where you want it. It's just, but if, you don't have to, yeah. See over there, and then kind of finish sunking it around, and then coming back. Over here, I was mentioning those. We use the leaf litter pieces, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Just around underneath all of those trees that I placed earlier, we're just kind of adding in these fallen leaves. Just adds a really nice level of detail, a little bit of like environmental storytelling. If these trees have been shedding their leaves, they're falling down. hasn't been raked up yet, all of that kind of stuff. It just makes the enclosure feel so much more dynamic, so much more alive. It's an incredible piece to have. Hopefully they'll continue to add more, but they're flexi colors, maybe. Are they? I don't know. I didn't flexi color them for this. They might be flexi color though. Which they are absolutely incredible. So over here I'm coming back to that beelzelbufo enclosure, adding in some more of the climbers, some lipstick palm scaled down using the micro technique, as well as some cabbage tree palms, and then a lot of the bracken ferns. I really go to town adding in all of these different bracken ferns you'll see in a second, just really like filling it up. I think that turns out really nice, adding in a couple more of those, changing out those angles and stuff. I played around with adding a bit of ivy. I ended up going against it though. I didn't really feel like it was doing much for the enclosure. I'm just adding a bit too much clutter. And then we go ahead and add a waterfall over here, which turned out really fun using those fountain pieces. And then of course, we got water, needs to be cleaned out, gotta add a drain in there as well. So then once I'm happy with that, I actually go ahead over here and just start planning out where I want the menarana enclosure to go. And then we go ahead and start building it, which is super fun. I actually end up using these rocks here instead to go for a bit of a different look for the walls. Well, still the same look, but slightly different texture. And super happy with that. And then here I'm just making sure, kind of research that little gap where I was researching the kind of like environment these guys lived in. And I'm going for like a dry foresty look. Dry, like savanna-y, well not savanna because savanna technically didn't exist based on modern definition, but that kind of like dry, deserty, foresty look in the dry season. And so for that we use that kind of like really like muted-y, browny yellow sand color, as well as some rocks. Obviously things that are going to absorb a lot of heat is the snake. But then for like foliage-wise, we're using some agave plants, diamond leaf willow bush or something along that, diamond leaf, that's how I remember it. We use chrysolite bushes, we use prickly pears, some white sage bushes even. See over here, sinking them in down to the ground. Got our dry Russian thistle bushes, all kinds of things going on here. And up more different agaves, aloe veras, sticks, all kinds of stuff. And it turned out really cool. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So putting a roof on that, again, for some reason decided to go see how that light looks. Obviously it wasn't going to work. So we added some of those floodlights, but this enclosure is even bigger, so we ended up needing 4 of them, but for now I just stick with these 2. I don't know if you have it on camera, but I changed out the colour of the ones that we put at the back in a sec. And then I just added a bit more of a slight tropical feel, just to kind of like bring it in there with some date palms and a little bit of cabbage palm. Just kind of like create that kind of like mix of that dry and wet season there, and it looked really nice. Adding in some rock shelves, places that the snake can kind of hide, get a bit close to the ceiling maybe if it wants to. Increasing the usability of the enclosure there. And then you see there, as I mentioned, they add those 4 lights, but I do go out and add a bit of like a reddish tone to the lights at the back. That's not on camera though. And so here it's starting to work on the foliage around the enclosure. I'm filling that up. You can get away with putting a lot more foliage around in those places because the animals aren't walking there. So we go ahead and add in a few date palms around that little area just at the top here. And then working on the rest of the viewing area for this is the fence that we used as the wall there. I ended up flipping that around. And here I'm kind of playing around with how I want that to look. We ended up switching it around the other way, have that stone, show off the stone pieces there. Again, those are from the Rebirth pack as well. And just kind of like adding that around there and adding a bit of using these wood pieces here as a little bit of a softener. Almost like as if they were a bit lower, they'd be a seat. They're obviously way too tall for that, but I think it just looked really nice for that little area there. I don't do that all in the rest of the uses of this fence. And I think that was the right choice. But you can see they're adding in a few benches into the wall as well, kind of like sinking them in that little bit. That did that really nice. And then just matching up with the, I had to re-put on the wood panels there along this side because I hadn't made it a part of the group by mistake. And something just like cut out there was adding that fence to the other side there. And so now I'm working on another kind of like shade structure on this viewing gallery, just because it feels like really open and like it get really hot. So we go ahead and use some of those wood pieces on the same angle that they are in that fence. and then kind of create a bit of a framework here that we can put in some of those wooden arbors down into. And so I kind of have it like be flat here, but I'm like, oh, I want to put a bit of an angle. So I kind of take those pieces, rotate them down, and then just like individually take these little pieces there, and then copy them across. And so once I'm done with that, I'm figuring out what I want to put in there, and like I mentioned, we do end up choosing the wooden arbors, but I play around with a couple other things, looking at potentially there being any canvas pieces that are off the grid, but there's not, so sucks, because since it is on an angle, but like a custom angle, it has to be an off-grid piece. We end up just choosing these arbors here, and then just putting them twice, just to give it a bit more of a sense of like coverage. And then it's on to adding in some more trees around here, adding in a small little palm tree there, as well as a little custom version of pinnae pines, I think they are, but like spun together. And then I use this bios and tree sign because it kind of was felt a bit like a baobab, which is, you know, that iconic African tree. So I put that sign in there. And then I was mentioning way back in the speed build, we talked about those big tall pieces of grass, and this is what I'm doing right now. So we're using the elephant grass and the short common reeds as the main pieces of like volume to our grass, as well as some wattle bushes, and I believe I also used in there some of saplings occasionally. I can't remember which one though. Maybe the elm tree saplings, if they are elm tree. Yeah. So then over here, and what I'm actually doing is taking those stone wall and like fences over there, wood fences, and you see a bit of rope in there as well, and kind of putting that all the way around the edge, just to kind of like seclude the Africa precinct, and also kind of like from both sides, right? So when you're looking into the Majungasaurus enclosure, you're not fully looking out into the rest of the zoo, and kind of keeping the precinct separate, but also so you're not looking into the Africa precinct when you're on that main path there. And then going ahead, adding in some foliage that's kind of growing out of control. We've got some little saplings in there, all kinds of grasses, everything just like growing out there, which way but sideways. Got to put a tree in there even. Yeah, kind of like putting in that one in there, just kind of giving it a little bit like, there's no acacia tree, so I'm just kind of trying to get that vibe there. You can see with merging those two trees together. And then over here, adding in another, because it got cut out, we added a waterfall, using the actual terrain tools there, so you can see that I added a little bit of a barrier from the other side. I had one already on the side of the enclosure, but just another one at that fence there. And then going over here, adding in some more fences over here. I really love the exit out of this precinct. See, adding in another one of those baobab signs, just like that. It's like a marker to the exit. And I play around with one by the Spinosaurus, but it just wasn't feeling right, so I don't do that. And so I feel that's looking really good, making sure we're adding in these fake soil pieces. But we're pretty much getting to the end of the speed build here. In fact, we're exactly at the end of the speed build pretty much, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time and enjoy the cinematics, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you saw. Bye-bye.